The lace curtain stirred as the spring breeze swept through the cracked window of the McAllister family home, carrying the scent of gardenias and magnolia blossoms. Rory stood in the stillness of her childhood bedroom, barefoot silk robe wrapped tightly around her frame, watching the shadows dance across the hardwood floor. Her wedding dress, ivory custom paid for in full, hung from the carved armoire, like it was waiting for someone braver than her to step into it. Outside, Savannah stirred quietly. Down the oak-lined street, guests were already arriving at the chapel-turned-event venue, a place Rory had passed 100 times growing up, never imagining she'd be the one waiting behind its heavy wooden doors. Her mother's voice floated up the staircase. Something about flowers. Something about the ice not being cold enough. Something that didn't matter. "Everything okay up here?" Marla Jean's voice sliced through the air, warm and uninvited, in the way that only godmothers and grandmothers could be. Rory turned, managing a smile. Just breathing. Marla Jean stepped in like she owned the house. "You've always breathed too quietly, sugar. Big moments like this, you gotta make noise." Rory smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her reflection in the antique mirror caught her attention. She looked like a woman in a perfume ad. Perfect skin. Perfect posture. Everything exactly as planned. And yet something in her eyes whispered back, "I don't know if this is right." Downstairs, laughter erupted. Her best friend Lottie was holding court in the kitchen, no doubt sipping champagne and teasing someone about neckties or ex-boyfriends. Rory turned back to the window. "It's all happening so fast," Baby Marla Jean said gently. Walking over, "It's been 2 years of engagement and 6 years of playing nice with that boy's family. If anything, it's happening slow." "I know." A pause. But Rory's throat tightened. She didn't answer. Marla Jean didn't press. She simply reached for a gold pin on the nearby vanity. "Your mama asked me to give you this today. Said it belonged to your great-grandmother. She wore it on the day she decided to stop saying yes when she meant maybe." She handed it over, then left without another word. Rory held the pin between her fingers. It was shaped like a magnolia, delicate and smooth, and just heavy enough to remind her that some things are carried. She slid the robe from her shoulders and stepped into the gown. The fabric whispered around her ankles like it had secrets. The venue was breathtaking. Soft lights strung across 100-year-old beams, the air rich with the scent of cut flowers and fresh linens. Guests milled about in tailored suits and floral dresses, admiring the decor and the carefully curated playlist humming gently through vintage speakers. Outside, a black SUV rolled to a stop near the back entrance. Calder Hayes stepped out dressed in a charcoal suit and quiet confidence. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, glancing down at the gift box in his hand, a contribution from his firm to the Historical Preservation Society Rory worked for. Nothing personal, nothing intimate, just business. His 15-year-old daughter Tessa hopped out of the passenger seat, squinting against the light. "Are we supposed to go in?" "We're just dropping this off," Calder replied, already walking toward the side door. Inside the staging room, Rory's hands shook slightly as she placed pearl earrings, her mother's, on her lobes. Lottie stepped in barefoot, holding 2 flutes of champagne. Her eyes lit up when she saw Rory. "Oh, honey, you look like a dream." Rory turned, smoothing the bodice of her gown. "Do I look calm?" "No." Lottie grinned. "You look like you're waiting for something to go wrong, which probably means you're about to make a great wife." Rory laughed, short and nervous. Lottie set the glasses down. "Listen, I know you've been second-guessing. That's normal, but you've always been steady. This is just nerves, right? Rory said too quickly. Good. Then let's get you married. Rory nodded, but inside something tilted. Outside, Calder and Tessa reached the back entrance. He handed the gift box to the coordinator. For Ms. McAllister from Hayes & Co. Congrats to the bride. The coordinator smiled. She'll appreciate it. Oh, and we're running about 10 minutes behind. Groom's room is locked. No one's heard from the best man either. Calder raised a brow. Everything okay? The coordinator gave a tight smile. Nothing we can't handle. Inside the groom's room. Silence. A tuxedo lay carefully draped over the chair. The shoes polished. The phone charger still plugged into the wall. But Mason was nowhere to be found. Still no update, Rory asked, standing at the ready behind the chapel doors, bouquet in hand, veil down. The planner gave her a tight smile. Just a few more minutes. Rory inhaled slowly. Everything inside her was loud. Her heartbeat, her thoughts, the voice that whispered, "You already knew, didn't you?" Lottie appeared again, eyes uncertain now. Want me to check? Rory shook her head. No. I just want to get through this. From behind the curtain, Rory caught the sound of organ music shifting. Guests rustling. The planner stepped in again, her face pale now. Rory. The air went still. He's not here. A pause so long it swallowed the room, he left. Rory whispered. The planner nodded. We've called, texted. No response. For one terrifying moment, Rory thought she might collapse. Then she heard a voice. Excuse me. Low. Steady. Familiar. She turned. Calder Hayes stood just beyond the side entrance of the chapel. Alone. 100 guests sat waiting on the other side of the door. I saw the coordinator's face. I know he's not coming. Rory stared frozen. He stepped closer, tone calm, but urgent. You don't have to go out there alone. If you want, just pretend I'm the groom. The weight of it hit her. Not just the words, but the choice. Silence stretched between them, then she nodded once. Okay. And with that, she took his hand. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The air inside the chapel was thick with confusion. Rows of guests whispered behind cupped hands, fans fluttering in nervous fingers. A soft murmur rippled like wind through tall grass curiosity, giving way to disbelief, then awe. At the altar, Rory stood motionless beside Calder Hayes. She felt the silence pressing against her chest like a wall. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her grip. Not from fear, not exactly, but from the sheer weight of standing where she never expected to stand. Not like this. The soft creak of wooden pews echoed as guests leaned in, eyes darting, uncertain whether this was a performance or a disaster unfolding in real time. Next to her, Calder didn't flinch. He faced the room like he belonged there. Like he'd always been there. One hand resting gently against the small of her back, the other relaxed at his side. And that simple steadiness was the only thing keeping her upright. Do we say something? She whispered without turning. I can, he replied, low and steady. She hesitated. Make it sound like we meant to do this. His jaw ticked once. Then he stepped slightly forward and lifted his gaze to the stunned crowd. There's been a change of plan, Calder said, his voice clear but calm. The bride remains the bride, and she deserves every ounce of respect you came here to give her. A beat passed. Then another. Slowly, someone in the back row stood, placing a hand to her heart. A few more followed. A quiet ripple of guests rising, not in protest, not in confusion, but in solemn agreement. Rory blinked, stunned. Calder turned slightly, offering his arm. Rory took it. Together they stepped away from the altar. Not as bride and groom, but as something else. Something no one had words for yet. The reception began in slow, awkward pieces. Servers poured champagne with unsure hands. The quartet played soft instrumental jazz, avoiding anything too celebratory. Plates clinked. Conversations stuttered. No one seemed to know what to say, so most said nothing at all. Rory sat at the sweetheart table with Calder facing the crowd of guests who were now trying to politely pretend this was just unconventional, not heartbreaking, not humiliating, just different. She could still feel every stare, every half-glance, every uncertain smile. And yet Calder sat beside her like the air was clear. He didn't speak. He didn't fidget. He simply existed beside her, quiet, unmoving like a lighthouse in fog. After a long stretch of silence, he spoke without looking at her. "You don't have to pretend for me. I'm not," she said, voice soft. He finally turned toward her. "Then what are you doing?" Rory took a long breath, trying not to fall apart in a room full of people who came to watch me be happy. Calder's eyes held hers for a moment too long. He nodded once. "That's fair." A pause. "Thank you," she added quietly. "For stepping in. You looked like you were about to be left standing there. I couldn't let that happen." Her voice dropped. "Most people would have just watched. I'm not most people." Something in the way he said it made her look at him again. Really look. She had worked for Calder Hayes for almost 4 years, knew him as the man who rarely raised his voice, rarely cracked a smile, and never mingled at office parties longer than 20 minutes. But tonight, something was different. He wasn't cold. He wasn't even detached. He was calm, measured, kind. And maybe that felt more dangerous than any grand gesture could have. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted them. Rory Lottie stood near the edge of the table, eyes wide, trying to read her friend's expression. Her dress was rumpled from running either to find someone or to avoid the attention herself. She held a glass of champagne like it was a shield. "You okay?" Rory nodded. As okay as someone can be while being not married. Lottie's eyes flicked to Calder. "Is this a new development, or—" Calder leaned back slightly, allowing Rory the space to answer. "No," she said. "Just survival." Lottie exhaled, then leaned in closer. "You need me to kick anyone out, I'll do it in heels." That pulled a small laugh from Rory. "The first one of the day." "No. Just stay close. I always do." As Lottie walked away, Calder cleared his throat lightly. "She cares about you." "She's my person," Rory replied. "She's loud and blunt and the only one who ever told me Mason wasn't right for me." Calder didn't react, but something flickered in his gaze. "She was right," Rory added, then glanced down at her plate. "And I think I always knew." The string lights above them hummed faintly. Somewhere in the background, the music shifted to a slow, instrumental cover of a love song Rory didn't have the heart to recognize. Then Calder asked, "Why didn't you call it off?" Rory swallowed, because I thought maybe if I stood still long enough, everything would settle into place. That the doubt was just fear. That the voice in my head wasn't reason, it was anxiety. A long breath. But I was wrong. That voice knew. Calder didn't offer pity. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. He just sat there letting her say the truth out loud. Then finally he said something that made her throat tighten. "You deserved someone who would have shown up." Rory's eyes burned, but she didn't let it fall apart. "Not here. Not now." "Funny?" she said, lips tight. "You're the only one who actually did." And then for the first time, Calder smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't polished, but it was real, and it landed deeper than she expected. As the night drew on, most of the guests trickled out, leaving behind half-full glasses and whispered condolences masked as compliments. Rory stood near the back doors, holding her bouquet, like it was still tethered to something. Tessa approached quietly, shoes in hand curls falling from a too-loose braid. "Hi," she said, hesitant but curious. "Hi," Rory replied, smiling. "My dad doesn't usually do things like that," Tessa said after a beat. "Like what make a scene? Step into something messy." Rory tilted her head. "Why do you think he did?" Tessa shrugged. "Maybe because he knew what it feels like to be left." Rory didn't answer. She couldn't. But something settled in her chest, an ache that was no longer loneliness. It was recognition. As the night sky blanketed the city in quiet, Calder joined them, jacket draped over one arm. "We should go," he said gently. Rory nodded, still unsure where go meant. Tessa turned to her dad. "You gonna invite her to stay at the guest house?" Calder gave his daughter a look. Tessa smirked. "Well, you can't exactly leave her alone with wedding cake and 600 feet of peonies." He turned back to Rory. "It's up to you," he said, tone even. "It's quiet. No one knows it's mine. Just a place to breathe." Rory hesitated, then nodded. "I could use some air." The guest house sat behind a veil of Spanish moss, half hidden under the shadow of an ancient pecan tree. It was tucked at the back of Calder Hayes's quiet property. Low brick walls, pale blue shutters, a porch swing that creaked with every breeze. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where time slowed down, or maybe even forgot to pass at all. Rory stood at the threshold, heels dangling from one hand bouquet, long since abandoned. She stared at the soft glow spilling through the windows and wondered what it meant to be offered shelter by someone who didn't owe you a thing. She wasn't used to being the one who needed anything. "You sure about this?" Calder asked beside her, his voice just above a whisper. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm more sure than I was an hour ago." He unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting her walk in first. The space smelled like cedar and lemon. Clean but lived in. A worn leather armchair in the corner. A stack of old books by the window. The kitchen was small, but everything was in place, coffee mugs hanging from hooks, a jar of honey beside the stove. Nothing about it felt like a guest space. It felt safe. Rory turned in a slow circle, then looked back at him. "You sure you want me here?" Calder leaned against the doorframe, arms loosely crossed. "I don't offer things I don't mean." That landed harder than it should have. She nodded once and walked further in setting her shoes near the couch. Her feet sank into the cool wood floor, and for the first time all day she didn't feel like she was on display. "You hungry?" he asked. "No," she said then, after a beat. "Maybe." "But not for food." He nodded like he understood, without needing to press further. "There's water in the fridge. Coffee's old, but I can make a fresh pot in the morning. Thank you. I'll leave you to it." She almost let him go. Almost. "Calder." He turned hand still on the doorknob. "Why did you really step in today?" A pause stretched between them. His fingers tightened slightly on the wood. "Because you looked like you were about to fall," he said finally. "And I couldn't just stand there and watch someone crumble in front of a crowd pretending not to notice." She blinked. "You don't even like crowds." "I don't," he agreed with a hint of a smile. "But I like dignity. And you didn't deserve to lose yours just because someone else didn't know what to do with your heart." Silence wrapped around them. And for once it didn't feel heavy. "Good night, Rory," he said quietly. "Good night, Calder." He closed the door behind him. She stood in the middle of the room, barefoot and sleepless, as the quiet folded around her like a warm blanket. The tears came slowly, no sobbing, no heaving, just the kind that slipped down her face, like they'd been waiting for permission. The morning sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, painting golden patterns across the floor. Rory woke curled on the couch, wrapped in a knit blanket she didn't remember finding. Her hair was a soft mess around her shoulders, and her dress still hanging in the corner looked more like a costume than a memory. A soft knock tapped at the door. She sat up too fast, then composed herself. When she opened it, Tessa stood on the porch with a paper bag and a hopeful smile. "Hi, Dad made breakfast. I told him you probably didn't want eggs from a stranger, so I got you a muffin." Rory blinked, caught off guard. "I also brought coffee," Tessa added quickly, lifting a thermos like it was sacred cargo. "Thank you," Rory said, stepping aside. "Want to come in?" Tessa glanced over her shoulder. "Only for a minute. He doesn't like people thinking I'm nosy. You don't strike me as nosy." Tessa grinned. "That's because I'm good at it." They sat at the small table by the window. Tessa unpacked the muffin and placed it on a napkin like it was a peace offering. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said softly. For what he did. The guy." Rory exhaled. "You don't have to apologize for him, I know Tessa said, but I watched you yesterday and I thought, that's the kind of woman I want to be. You didn't scream or cry, you just stood there." Rory looked out the window, blinking against the morning light. Sometimes standing still is the only way to stop yourself from falling apart. Tessa nodded. "My mom was like that." The air shifted. She used to say, "There's a difference between breaking and bending. One means you're done. The other just means you're learning how to move." Rory swallowed the lump in her throat. "Your mom sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have liked you, too." A pause. Then Tessa stood and reached for the thermos. "I should go. Dad's pretending not to watch from the window, but he totally is." Rory smiled. "Thanks for the muffin?" Tessa winked. "Anytime." By afternoon, Rory had changed into jeans and a soft cotton tee Calder had left folded by the door. It was oversized, comfortable, and smelled faintly like cedar. She sat outside on the porch, swing feet tucked beneath her, the breeze lifting her hair just enough to remind her the world hadn't ended. She heard the screen door creak from the main house. Calder walked across the lawn with slow, measured steps, 2 coffees in hand. "You made it through the night?" he said, offering her one. "Barely," she said, taking it. "You always keep spare clothes around," he smirked. "The guest house is usually for out-of-town architects. You're the first runaway bride I've had. That makes me feel special." "You are." He said it so casually, so easily that she almost missed it. But the way her chest tightened told her she hadn't. Calder sat on the steps instead of beside her, keeping a comfortable distance. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the edge of an old watch and skin that caught the sun like someone who worked outside more than he let on. They sat in quiet for a long moment. Finally, she asked, "What was she like?" "Your wife." He didn't move, but his breath caught ever so slightly. "She was smart. Not loud, but you listened when she spoke. Always had ink on her fingers. She wrote poems no one ever read." Rory turned slightly toward him. "Do you miss her every day, but not the way people expect? It's not sharp anymore. It's quiet. Like a room in your house you keep the door closed on, but you still dust." She blinked back something she didn't expect to feel. "What about you?" he asked. "Do you miss him?" Rory let the question sit. then shook her head. I think I miss the version of him I imagined, the one who never really existed. Grief doesn't always come from death, Calder said. Sometimes it's from finding out someone you loved never showed up in the way you needed. The truth of it landed hard. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked quietly. Calder looked up at her, then eyes steady and soft. Because I've been the one left before, and I know how heavy it is to stand alone. The breeze picked up again, and in that silence something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the first quiet thread of something real. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The next morning began with sunlight breaking over the marsh painting, everything in soft golds and blues. Rory sat on the back porch of the guest house, knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in a borrowed cardigan that smelled faintly of wood smoke and lemon. The coffee in her hands had gone lukewarm, but she hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her. She didn't check it. Then it buzzed again. She glanced over reluctantly. 24 missed calls. 7 from her mother, 12 from her former maid of honor, 1 from Mason. She stared at his name, just 5 letters, but it suddenly felt like a boulder. The front door creaked open behind her. Calder's footsteps were easy to recognize now. Steady, deliberate, no apology in them. "Morning," he said, handing her a fresh mug without needing to ask. She nodded her thanks, grateful for the quiet way he just existed near her, without filling the space with questions. He took a seat beside her this time, their knees almost touching. She noticed the way he rested his hands on his thighs, relaxed but alert. Like a man who'd learned the hard way how to give people space without letting them drift. "You didn't answer any of those, did you?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Don't really see the point." He took a sip from his own mug. Sometimes silence speaks loud enough. They sat in the lull for a moment, birds calling in the trees. Then Rory looked out toward the marsh, voice quiet. "My mom wants me to do damage control. Public statement, polite words, all the usual stuff that makes it look like everything's fine." "Is it?" She shook her head once. "It's not even close." Calder didn't respond. He just let the truth hang in the air. "I can't go home," Rory added softer now. "Not yet. Not with everyone waiting to see if I'm going to cry or collapse or pretend I'm okay. You don't owe anyone a performance." She looked over at him. "That's easy to say when you haven't lived your whole life being the girl who never makes a scene." "You made one," he said with a hint of a smile. "You walked down the aisle with your head up when your whole life cracked open." She gave a dry laugh. "Only because you were standing there." He looked at her long enough that she felt her stomach twist. Then he said something that caught her off guard. "I almost didn't." Rory blinked. "Why not?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, because stepping into someone else's moment felt wrong, like I was crossing a line I didn't fully understand. She searched his expression. "And what changed?" He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, "You looked like you were about to disappear. And I've seen that look before in the mirror after my wife passed. I couldn't let someone else fall into that silence." The air between them shifted. Rory's voice was barely a whisper. "You keep saying that you couldn't just stand there, like you didn't have a choice." He met her eyes. "I didn't." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Then Calder stood, brushing a hand through his hair. "There's a board meeting today at the foundation," he said, switching gears gently. "I'll be gone for a few hours. Tessa's at school till 3. She nodded, grateful for the break in tension, even if her chest still ached with the weight of his honesty. And Rory, he added as he stepped off the porch, you don't have to rush into anything. Not your story, not your healing, not even the end of this cup of coffee. She looked down at the steaming mug, then back up at him. Thanks for saying that, she said quietly. He offered a soft nod and walked back toward the house, leaving her in the stillness once more. But the stillness no longer felt like silence. It felt like room. Later that afternoon, Rory stood barefoot in the guest house kitchen, flipping through a faded cookbook Tessa had left on the counter. It was filled with handwritten notes in the margins, reminders like, add cinnamon here, or Mom used to double the vanilla. There was something tender about it. Personal. She touched one of the notes with her fingertip, then stepped away before she could feel too much. The knock at the door came lightly. Hesitant. She assumed it was Calder. She was wrong. When she opened the door, Marla Jean stood there with a casserole dish in hand and sunglasses too large for her face. Lord help me, Rory, she said without waiting for permission. You've got half the city whispering like you ran off with a country singer. Rory blinked. What I've heard everything from Mason having a breakdown to you eloping with your boss. She walked in, set the dish on the counter, and gave Rory a once-over. Well, at least you look good in heartbreak. I always said it'd suit you. I didn't elope. I know sugar. I was there. She pulled her sunglasses off and fixed Rory with that impossible-to-escape stare. But let me ask you something. Rory braced herself. Okay. That man, Calder Hayes. He didn't step up out of obligation. He stepped up because he sees you. You know that, right? Rory swallowed. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Rory folded her arms, suddenly aware of her bare feet, the borrowed cardigan, the way the entire town was already spinning their version of her life, while she was still trying to process it herself. I'm not ready, she said quietly, to answer questions, to define anything. Marla Jean nodded slowly, then leaned in and kissed her cheek. You don't owe anyone answers, sweetheart. But don't confuse not being ready with pretending you weren't moved. Some people show up once, some show up when it's easy, but he showed up when it counted. That's rare. Then she picked up her purse, gave Rory one last wink, and walked out as quickly as she came. Rory stood alone in the kitchen, eyes stinging. That night, Calder returned later than expected. His shoulders carried the weight of something unspoken. She could see it before he even said a word. How was the meeting, she asked as he stepped inside. He exhaled. Fine. No fires. She raised a brow, but someone at the table mentioned Mason's family is doing quiet outreach, trying to spin the story before it grows teeth. Rory's jaw tightened. Of course they are. They've got resources, PR firms, legacy to protect. And I'm just the girl who got left, she said bitterly. Calder stepped closer, not touching her, but standing just near enough to make his words land deeper. No. You're the woman who stayed standing. There's a difference. She met his eyes, and in that moment something in her cracked. But it wasn't weakness, it was clarity. Then I guess it's time I tell my story myself. A long pause stretched between them. Are you ready? He asked softly. No, she said. Then, but I'm going to do it anyway. Rory stood in front of the mirror in the guest house bathroom, her hair still damp from the shower. The towel wrapped around her was slipping, but she didn't move. Her phone sat on the sink beside her camera app, open, recording her reflection, silent for now, waiting for her voice. She stared at herself. Not the perfect bride. Not the polished PR executive. Just a woman stripped of performance, caught between humiliation and the quiet edge of something stronger. She hit record. My name is Rory McAllister. She began, voice steadier than she felt. I was supposed to get married 3 days ago. She paused, looking into her own eyes. And I got left. At the altar, in front of friends, family, strangers, no explanation, no warning, just silence. Her breath caught, but she didn't stop. Everyone keeps asking me if I'm okay. I don't know how to answer that. Because this isn't about being okay. It's about being real, and sometimes real doesn't look graceful. It doesn't sound polished. It's just the truth. She let the words hang, then stopped recording. She didn't need to post it yet. She just needed to know she could. A knock sounded at the door. Rory Calder's voice came through gently. She wrapped herself tighter and opened the door a crack. Give me 10, take 20. I made coffee. She smiled. You always make coffee. Better than pretending I have the right words. She closed the door again, heart tight. By the time she joined him on the back porch, the coffee was poured, and the morning sun was breaking through the clouds, like it had something to prove. Calder sat in the same chair he always did, legs stretched out, mug in hand, like he'd been waiting without looking like he was waiting. Rory dropped into the chair beside him, sighing. I did something. He turned. Good something or reckless something, little of both. She reached into her robe pocket and handed him her phone, the video still queued up. He watched in silence. When it ended, he didn't speak right away. Finally, he handed it back. It's raw, honest, powerful. I didn't post it. Why not? Because once I do, there's no going back. Mason's family will have a full statement out within hours. I'll be the messy one, the bitter one, the woman who aired her heartbreak online. He looked at her long and quiet. And I'm tired of being afraid of what people think. There it was. The real reason. I wasn't just marrying Mason, she continued. I was marrying his world, his curated life, his boardroom family and his champagne traditions, and his mother's voice in my ear telling me when to smile. She ran a hand through her hair. And part of me wanted it. The approval, the structure, the sense that I had arrived. But I lost myself trying to fit into someone else's picture of who I should be. She looked down into her coffee, the steam curling like a question. Calder didn't offer advice. He didn't fix it. He just sat there, with her. That was enough. Then he said, so post it. She looked up. Don't do it for revenge. Don't do it to prove something. Do it because it's yours, your voice, your story. And if it backfires, then we handle it. He smiled gently. I'm not going anywhere. Something warm and unfamiliar moved through her chest. Not butterflies, something deeper. He wasn't charming her. He wasn't trying to win her. He was just here. She opened her phone. Clicked upload. And just like that, the story wasn't just hers anymore. By late afternoon, the video had over 100,000 views. The comments were flooding in. Women. Men. Strangers who had never been left at the altar but knew what it felt like to be abandoned mid-story. To be silenced. To be told to keep smiling while their hearts cracked beneath the surface. Lottie showed up with 2 bottles of wine and a grocery bag full of cheese and crackers. You're going viral, she said, as she plopped onto the couch. Which means you're officially a cautionary tale and a hero. Rory blinked. That doesn't feel real. Oh, it's real, baby. You've just become every woman's voice who didn't get a chance to speak before the narrative was decided for her. Rory glanced at the screen again. Is it strange that I don't feel triumphant? No, Lottie said gently. Because this isn't the end, it's the middle, and the middle is always the hardest part. Tessa walked in not long after wearing her school uniform, and a look of proud disbelief. "Your video's on my For You page," she said, setting her backpack down. "People are reposting it with piano music and crying." Rory laughed softly. "That's one way to process a breakup. You're not just processing a breakup," Tessa said. "You're rewriting your story." Out loud. There was a silence, a thick, emotional silence. Then Tessa added almost as an afterthought, "He saw it too." "Mason." Rory turned sharply. "What, he sent a message to your inbox? It's sitting there. You haven't opened it." Rory's mouth went dry. "How do you know?" "Because I was using your iPad to look up a recipe, and it popped up." Lottie jumped in. "You don't owe him anything, not even a read receipt," "I know," Rory said. "But I want to know what he thinks he has to say." She walked to the counter, picked up the iPad, and stared at the screen. The message preview read, "I never meant to hurt you." I panicked. "I know that's not enough, but..." She clicked it open. The full message spilled out in long, clumsy paragraphs. Apologies, explanations, vague references to pressure from his family, words like confused and overwhelmed and not ready. Not once did he ask how she felt. Not once did he take ownership. Rory stared at the screen pulse, steady. Then she clicked delete. Calder had just stepped in with a tray of lemonade when she looked up. It was nothing she said. "No," he said gently, meeting her eyes. "It was something. But it wasn't everything." She smiled softly. Lottie raised her glass. "To endings we never asked for, and beginnings we didn't see coming." Rory clinked hers against it. "To stories we get to write ourselves." And as the sun dipped behind the trees and laughter filled the guest house, Rory realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe until now. She hadn't just been left at the altar. She'd been set free. The next morning, Rory woke before the sun. The guest house was quiet, still draped in shadows. She moved slowly, careful not to break the peace that had settled over the space like a blanket. There were no alarms, no schedules, just her bare feet brushing the hardwood floor and the faint rustle of leaves outside. She hadn't slept much, but it wasn't the restless kind of exhaustion she was used to. It was different, something closer to clarity. The video had gone viral overnight. Her inbox overflowed with messages, some from old friends, some from complete strangers. Stories, confessions, gratitude. Women from all over writing to say, "Thank you for saying what I never could." But that morning, Rory didn't open any of them. She needed quiet, stillness, something that wasn't about reactions or validation. She slipped outside, wrapped in a shawl, and found Calder already there. He was standing in the backyard coffee mug in hand eyes on the soft pink horizon. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, without turning. She walked up beside him, something like that. The air smelled like damp earth and honeysuckle, the kind of scent that made you pause just to breathe it in. "You always come out here in the mornings?" she asked. "Every day since Tessa was born." "Habit, I guess." Rory tilted her head. "To think, to remember, to forget. Depends on the day." She smiled softly, then sipped from the mug he handed her without needing to ask if she wanted one. "I read Mason's message yesterday," she said after a long silence. Calder's brow lifted slightly. And I deleted it." He didn't react, just nodded like he already knew. It felt like he was trying to explain something he didn't even understand himself, like handing me a puzzle missing all the corners. Calder glanced at her. "That's a good metaphor. I have a lot of those lately." Another pause. She wasn't sure why this moment felt so important, so quiet and charged all at once. Then Calder said, "There's a charity gala coming up. For the foundation?" Rory looked over at him. The one we host every fall. Yeah, we're short a speaker. You've got half the country listening to you right now. You want the mic? She blinked. You're serious? Completely. I'm not exactly foundation polished right now. He sipped his coffee. Maybe that's what they need. Someone who isn't performing. Her heart thudded once. What would I even say? He turned to face her fully, the early light catching his jawline, softening his usual stillness. You'd say the truth. That love doesn't always look like we expect. That strength can come from standing up even after the fall. That sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is keep walking alone if she has to. Her throat tightened. She looked away before the emotion crept too close. I'll think about it. No rush. They stood there in silence again, 2 cups of coffee between them, and an unspoken thread beginning to tighten. Then Calder added quieter, Now, you know you don't have to stay in the guest house. She looked up. What, you're welcome in the main house? You always have been. Rory let the invitation hang. Not because she didn't want it, but because she wasn't sure what it meant yet. Moving in didn't scare her, but what it might symbolize. That was trickier. I think I need a little more space, she said gently. Not from you, just for me. Calder nodded. That's a good answer. By noon, Rory was back inside, scrolling through emails on her laptop, pacing in the living room like it was her office. The guest house had become more than a hideout. It was becoming her somewhere a place of clarity, of deciding instead of reacting. Then she saw the subject line, Feature Request, the Magnolia Journal. She clicked it before she could overthink. A writer named Clara Monroe wanted to interview her. A full spread. A story of resilience, independence, and Southern grace. Rory read the email twice, then 3 more times. It was flattering, a huge opportunity, but it also felt like a trap, like her pain was about to be shaped into something tidy and palatable for page 27 of a glossy magazine. She closed the laptop, heart racing. Outside, she saw Tessa walking home from school, dragging her backpack by one strap, earbuds tucked in. Rory opened the door before Tessa could get to the porch. Hey, she called out. Tessa paused and smiled. You look stressed. Good eye. What happened? I got an email. From Magnolia. Like, the Magnolia? Yeah. They want to tell my story. Tessa stepped onto the porch and dropped her bag. That's huge, Rory. I know. But it feels complicated. Why? Because they don't know me. They know the version the internet made. Tessa nodded. So tell them the real one. Rory tilted her head. You always this wise? No, Tessa said, smirking. But you're kind of a big deal right now. I figured I'd rise to the moment. They both laughed, and some of the tension in Rory's shoulders broke apart. I don't want to be famous for getting left, she said. You won't be. Tessa replied. You'll be remembered for what you did after. That evening, Calder knocked on the guest house door with a folder in his hands. Rory opened it before he spoke. I figured you might want to see this, he said, offering the folder. She took it carefully and opened it to find the gala program neatly printed her name already slotted in as keynote speaker. I haven't said yes, she said. I know, he replied. But I believe in prepping for when you do. She looked at him, then down at the paper. The ink looked so permanent. I'm not the same person I was when I wrote speeches for this place. Good. She raised a brow. People don't need another polished, practiced story, he said. They need someone real, someone raw. Rory traced her name on the page, then looked back up at him. I'm scared. Do it, scared, Calder said. That's the only way anything worth doing ever happens. She stared at him for a long moment, then stepped forward and hugged him. No pretense. No hesitation. Just quiet, warm, human closeness. He didn't speak. He just held her back. Gentle. Steady. And for the first time since everything fell apart, she felt something click back into place inside her. Not because someone had filled the empty space, but because someone had stood beside it and waited. The guest house felt different now. Not just a place to hide, but a place to breathe. Rory sat at the kitchen table, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, watching the cursor blink on a blank document titled, "For the Gala." She hadn't written a speech in months, not since before the wedding planning swallowed her whole. She sighed, leaning back, letting her eyes drift toward the window. The sky was thick with clouds, the kind that rolled low and slow, heavy with the promise of rain. It matched her mood, restless waiting. A soft knock at the door pulled her from the quiet. She half expected Calder, but when she opened it, it was Marla Jean. She stood there holding a bouquet of wildflowers, nothing arranged, just a beautiful mess of color and stems that looked hand-picked from the roadside. Before you say anything, Marla Jean started stepping in without waiting. "These are not from me. They're from your mama, who, by the way, is about 2 seconds away from booking a flight to Savannah if you don't call her back." Rory blinked. "She sent you to guilt-trip me." "No, sweetheart. She sent me because she knows I don't sugarcoat things." Rory accepted the flowers, lips twitching. That's one way to put it. Marla Jean set her purse on the counter and poured herself a glass of water like she lived there. "Your mother's worried, rightfully so. She may not have raised a delicate flower, but even steel bends when you heat it up enough. I'm not breaking. I didn't say you were. But you've been bent for a while, and sometimes the last straw isn't what snaps us. It's what finally gives us permission to start again." Rory stared down at the bouquet. One of the stems had a smear of dirt still clinging to it. "She wanted me to marry into something shiny," Rory murmured. "Something that looked perfect." Marla Jean sipped her water. "Honey, your mama wanted you happy. She just confused safe with happy. Happens more than you'd think." Rory leaned against the counter. "I don't think I ever really loved him. I think I just loved not being alone." Marla Jean stepped closer, her tone softening. "Loneliness has a way of dressing up in love's clothes. Makes it hard to tell who's who until one walks out." The words sank deep. "I'm speaking at the gala," Rory said after a long pause. Calder asked. "Well, of course he did. He sees you." That word again? Sees. "And what do you see?" Rory asked. Marla Jean smiled. "I see a woman who's been handed back her own voice. Now the question is, what do you want to say?" Later that day, Rory found Calder in the main house's study. He was flipping through foundation reports, his reading glasses sliding halfway down his nose. "You look busy," she said from the doorway. He looked up, warm but tired. Always. "Want to distract me, maybe? I need a favor." "Anything. I want to visit the community garden tomorrow. The one by the elementary school. I haven't been since we built it out last year." Calder tilted his head. "You sure I need to see something growing?" He nodded slowly. "I'll take you. And one more thing. Name it. I need to ask you a question. And I need an honest answer." He closed the folder and gave her his full attention. "Ask away. When you look at me now, do you see someone you feel sorry for?" His brow furrowed. "No. Never." "Then what do you see?" He stood walking toward her with careful steps. When he reached her, he didn't touch her, just looked at her the way he always did. Steady. Kind. Real. "I see someone who walked through fire and didn't come out bitter. I see someone brave enough to be broken in public. I see someone who is finally becoming herself, not someone else's version of her." Rory swallowed hard. Then why are you so careful with me? His eyes didn't flinch. Because I respect you. Because I'm still figuring out what it means to let someone in again. And because when something matters this much, you don't rush it. She nodded slowly, lips pressed together. Okay, she whispered. He didn't ask what okay meant. She didn't explain. But something unspoken passed between them. Something gentle, yet undeniable. The next morning they drove to the garden in quiet companionship. The clouds had broken overnight, and sunlight spilled across the neighborhood in soft golds and greens. When they arrived, the garden looked exactly as Rory remembered: rows of kale and tomatoes, little signs with kid-drawn vegetables, a hand-painted bench near the back that read, "Planted with Purpose." Rory walked the paths, slowly, fingers brushing over leaves and blossoms, her heels replaced with worn boots Calder had found in the shed. She stopped near the center bed and crouched down. "Look at this," she murmured. Calder came to her side. A single sunflower had grown sideways, its head tilted at an odd angle, but still strong, still bright. "Bent, but not broken," he said. She looked up at him. Exactly. A group of school kids passed by on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering. One girl gasped and said, "That's her. The wedding lady." Rory turned, startled. Calder placed a hand on her shoulder. Not possessive, just grounding. The girl waved shyly. "I liked your video." Rory smiled, heart-catching in her throat. "Thank you." Another boy called out, "Are you going to marry him now?" The group burst into laughter and ran off. Rory flushed, glancing up at Calder, who had the decency to look amused but not smug. "Well," he said, "we've officially made it into elementary-level gossip." She laughed, full and unguarded. It felt good. It felt real. They sat on the painted bench for a while, neither rushing to fill the quiet. The breeze carried the scent of basil and damp wood chips. The sunflower nodded in the wind like it knew something they didn't. Rory looked over at him, her voice soft. "What do you think happens after all this?" He shrugged. "I think you speak at the gala. I think people listen. And I think, if you let it, life begins again." She leaned her head on his shoulder just for a moment, just long enough to know it was okay to rest. Maybe she whispered. Maybe it already has. The sun was beginning to dip low by the time they got back from the garden. Rory kicked off her boots by the porch, her fingers still dusted with soil. There was something grounding about the whole day, literally. She hadn't touched the earth in years. Not like that. Not with purpose. As she stepped into the guest house, the air was cooler than before. Still, almost like the house was holding its breath. She turned on the kettle, then opened her laptop, ready to put more work into the speech. A new notification flashed across the screen. Not an email this time. A tag. "You're trending again," Lottie had commented. Rory opened the post. It was a photo someone had taken of her and Calder on the bench at the community garden. She was leaning into him, his shoulder square against her cheek, both of them facing the sunflower, unaware of the camera. The caption read, "She got left at the altar." And then the real story began. Her stomach twisted, not with shame, but something dangerously close to fear. This was no longer just her private healing. It was becoming public narrative. People were watching, projecting, shipping. She clicked out of it quickly, closing the laptop before it swallowed her. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Lottie. She walked in holding a tablet and a bag of takeout that smelled like fried shrimp and hush puppies. "Tell me you've seen the post." "I did." "You okay?" Rory paused. "I don't know." Lottie handed her the food and sat across from her at the kitchen table. You know most people go viral for dancing with their dog or falling off a treadmill. You managed to touch a national nerve without ever raising your voice. I didn't ask for this, Rory said. No, but maybe it asked for you. That silenced her. Lottie leaned in, tapping the screen. This photo, it's got over 300,000 likes. And Calder, can we talk about how photogenic that man is? Rory groaned. Please don't. I'm serious. He's got that whole rugged widower gentle strength vibe going for him, like he walked out of a Nicholas Sparks movie. Lottie. What Rory gave her a look. I'm not ready. Lottie nodded, but her tone stayed firm. I know. But you're also not hiding. There's a difference. Rory exhaled, long and slow. It's all moving too fast, so slow it down. No one's forcing you into a romance montage. But don't act like what's happening isn't real. Rory looked down at her hands, the soil still in her cuticles. She hadn't even noticed. Do you think I'm just falling into something because it's convenient? She asked quietly. No, I think you're finally being seen. And that can feel terrifying when you're used to being cast. They ate in silence for a while. The food was hot and salty and grounding. Later, after Lottie left, Rory stepped outside. The evening air had shifted, a cooler breeze brushing her face. Calder was out back hammering something onto the side of the main house, a bracket for hanging string lights. His sleeves were rolled up his forearms, dusted with sawdust. She watched him for a second longer than she meant to. Need help, she called. He looked over, smiling. You offerin' or just being polite? A little of both. She crossed the grass barefoot and held the ladder steady as he adjusted the hook. You saw the post, he asked, without looking down. I did. You okay with it? I don't know. He climbed down, wiping his hands on a rag. It's not exactly how I imagined my retirement being memed into America's dad crush. She laughed, startled by how much she needed that. Sorry, she said, catching her breath. Don't be. I've been called worse. They stood there under the growing twilight. The light hung between them, unspoken and easy. Calder. Yeah, I need to ask you something, and I want the truth. He met her eyes. If I hadn't been left, if Mason had shown up, would you have stepped in anyway? His jaw tensed slightly, but not with discomfort. Just care. I would have stayed in that front row seat, clapping politely, heart in my throat. Rory stared at him, stunned by the honesty. But I wouldn't have said a word, he added. Because I would have thought you were choosing that life. And I would have respected it. Even if I hated it. She nodded slowly, emotion creeping up her throat. And when I walked toward you. After he didn't show, I was scared, Calder admitted. Because you looked like the part of you that had been holding everything together was about to give out. And I didn't know how to fix that. But I could stand there. So I did. She looked away, blinking fast. I'm not used to people showing up like that. I'm not used to being someone who does. Silence wrapped around them again, warm and honest. Then Rory said almost to herself, I'm afraid if I let myself feel this, I won't know how to stop. Calder stepped a little closer, not invading, just closing the air between them. You don't have to feel everything tonight, he said softly. Just feel what's true. Her breath caught, and in that quiet, something shifted. Not a declaration, not a kiss, just truth suspended in twilight. She looked up at him. You make it hard not to hope. He smiled, gentle and sure. That's all I'm trying to do. And as they stood beneath the first string of lights, just two people, uncertain but brave, Rory felt it again. That whisper of something beginning. Not flashy, not dramatic, but real. And maybe, just maybe worth risking everything for. Rain came overnight, not the kind that crashed or roared. This was quieter, persistent. Like the sky had decided to weep in steady rhythms, soft and slow. By morning, puddles lined the sidewalk, and the magnolia trees dripped with silver. Rory stood at the guest house window, coffee cupped between both hands, watching the world glisten. The speech document was open on the table behind her, still blank. The deadline for the gala was creeping close. Everyone assumed she'd have something brilliant, something polished. She'd built her whole career on putting the right words into the right mouths at the right time. But this time the words had to come from her. And that was harder. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. "You've got a visitor." "Not me. Thought you want a heads up." Before Rory could reply, she heard a soft knock at the door. She didn't move. Not right away. Then she opened it. Her breath caught. Standing in the soft morning drizzle was Mason. Hair damp, shoulders tense, tie undone like he'd tried to look casual and failed halfway through. He gave a sheepish smile. "Hey." Rory didn't open the door any wider. "Mason," she said, voice steady. I was hoping we could talk." She stared at him. Her heart didn't race. Her stomach didn't twist. That surprised her. "Why are you here?" she asked. He looked past her for a second, as if trying to find something in the space behind her, something familiar. "I made a mistake." She exhaled sharply through her nose, not quite a laugh. "Which part?" He blinked. The walking away. The silence. Or the fact that you thought showing up now would fix any of it. "I panicked," he said, voice rising a little. "Everything was happening so fast. My parents, the pressure, the venue." "Stop," Rory said, holding up a hand. "Don't come here to justify. If you came to explain, you should have done that when I was standing in a wedding dress." He opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. "You let me stand there, alone, while you disappeared." Mason shifted. "I thought maybe we could still talk. See where things are." "No," Rory said, voice softer now. "We can't." She wasn't angry. Not anymore. "I don't hate you," she added. "But I don't owe you closure. I gave you everything I had, Mason. I can't give you more." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression told him not to. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "You look different. I feel different." He hesitated. "Is it him?" Her brow lifted. "Who, that guy? The one in the garden photo? The one you're with now?" She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, "The man who showed up didn't need a title or a moment to prove something. He just stood next to me when no one else did." Mason looked away. Rain clung to his eyelashes. "Goodbye, Mason." She closed the door gently. And for the first time in weeks, her hands didn't shake. Later that afternoon, Calder found her in the kitchen, staring at the untouched keyboard again. He walked in quietly, watching her for a beat, before he said, "He showed up." She looked up, unsurprised. "You knew Tessa told me. I sent him away." "Good." Rory sat back, her voice tired but clear. He wanted to talk, to maybe see if there was still something there. "And is there?" She met Calder's eyes. "No." He nodded once. "No celebration, no ego, just respect." "I thought I'd feel shaken," she admitted. "But I didn't." "That's because you're not the same woman who waited for him at the altar." Rory pushed the laptop away and stood. "Walk with me, anywhere." They stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a mist, the air soft and cool. Everything smelled like damp earth and renewal. They wandered through the garden again, quieter this time. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say at the gala," Rory said. "Everyone wants a redemption story, a clean arc, but mine's still messy." Calder didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "Maybe tell them that." She glanced at him. "Tell them it's messy," he continued. "Tell them healing doesn't come with a bow, that sometimes you don't get the apology you deserved. But you find something better. Like what? Like dignity. Like clarity. Like a sense of self that doesn't come from someone else's approval. Rory swallowed hard. You always say the right thing, she said. No, he replied. I just stopped pretending to know everything. They stopped by the sunflower. Its head was drooping now, the weight of the rain bending it low, but it was still standing. Rory knelt, touching the wet petals gently. I think I know the first line of my speech, she whispered. Calder crouched beside her. Let's hear it. She looked at him, the weight of the morning, the months, the heartbreak behind her, but not forgotten. I was left at the altar, she said quietly. But I wasn't abandoned. I found my way back to myself. He nodded slowly. And maybe, she added, that was the love story I needed all along. They stayed there a while, the mist catching in their hair, the light softening around them. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced, just two people bent but not broken, and a story that wasn't over yet. 2 days before the gala, the air shifted again. It wasn't the weather this time, it was something quieter, heavier, like the hush that falls before a moment that might change everything. Rory sat on the porch of the guest house, wrapped in a blanket, the final draft of her speech in her lap. She hadn't read it out loud yet. Every time she tried, something caught in her throat. She'd spent years writing words for others, perfecting tone, timing, impact. But this one, this was hers. No veil, no borrowed phrases. Just truth. She closed her eyes and whispered the first line. I was left at the altar. But I wasn't abandoned. A tear slipped out before she could stop it. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was the weight of all that had come before, and the quiet beauty of what might be waiting next. She was so deep in thought she didn't hear Calder walk up. His footsteps were always soft, like he'd learned how to approach gently. He set a cup of tea beside her. Still working, he asked. She nodded, eyes still on the page. You want to read it to me? She hesitated. Not yet. He sat down beside her, close but not crowding. You don't have to make it perfect, he said. Rory glanced at him. That's the hardest part, letting go of that. Calder looked out toward the yard. You ever think about what your life might have looked like? If Mason had stayed, she didn't answer right away. Then all the time. But not because I miss it. I think about the version of myself I was trying to be for him. He turned to her. And she was quieter. Softer in ways that didn't feel like me. I thought being loved meant being less. Calder's jaw tightened just slightly. You ever feel like you had to be less? She asked. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling. After my wife died, people started treating me like I might break. I played along for a while. Let them treat me like glass. It's strange how easy it is to disappear without ever leaving. Rory looked at him with something soft behind her eyes. And now I stopped trying to be who everyone needed. I started figuring out who I needed to be. For me. For Tessa. For the life I want, not the one I thought I'd get. Their eyes met, and stayed. Something unsaid passed between them, like a thread finally catching. Calder, Rory said quietly, I'm scared that if I open my heart again, it'll break differently this time. Deeper. He didn't look away. I can't promise it won't. She swallowed. But I can promise I'd never walk away without a word. A breeze moved between them, lifting the edge of her blanket. She didn't pull it tighter. Instead, she asked, Can I tell you something stupid? Always. I keep wondering what it would have been like if you had been the one waiting at the altar. His eyes softened. I wasn't pretending that day. She froze. What? He nodded slowly. When I stood beside you holding your hand, it didn't feel like make-believe. It felt like something I'd been waiting to feel again. Rory's breath hitched. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Do you want this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Really? Or is it just timing?" Calder leaned forward, elbows on his knees, speaking carefully. "I want you. Not because of what happened. Not because I think you need saving. But because you already walked through fire and you came out real." He paused, then added, "And because I haven't felt this safe with someone in years." Rory blinked hard, her throat thick with emotion. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be," he said. "But I'll be here, whenever you are." That night, Rory couldn't sleep. The speech was done. The truth had been spoken. But her mind kept drifting back to that moment on the porch. To the way Calder looked at her like she wasn't broken. Like she was becoming. She got up, pulled on a sweater, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the stars sharp against the navy sky. She walked barefoot across the grass, past the garden, past the sunflowers now bent under their own bloom. She kept walking until she reached the edge of the old gazebo near the back of the property, half forgotten, cloaked in moonlight. And there he was. Calder, sitting alone, journal in hand. He looked up surprised but not startled. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. Couldn't sleep. He gestured beside him. She sat. He closed the journal slowly. "I used to come here when I needed to clear my head," he said. "Tessa and I built it after my wife passed. Never really finished it." "It's beautiful," Rory whispered. Silence settled again. Then she reached for his hand. He let her. They didn't speak. Not for a long time. Just two people sitting in the stillness, holding hands like a promise neither of them had to say out loud. And beneath the stars, with nothing staged or scripted, Rory finally let herself feel it. Not the fear, but the hope and the peace that came with it. The gala arrived on a warm Friday evening, cloaked in soft jazz, clinking glasses, and garden lights that swayed in the breeze like fireflies caught mid-dance. The event was held at the Bonaventure Conservatory, Savannah's pride, a sweeping space of marble floors, arched windows, and enough history to make every step feel important. Rory stood backstage, staring at her reflection in the long mirror. Her gown was deep forest green, simple, elegant, the kind of dress that didn't need to shout. Her hair swept into a soft twist, a few strands falling loose on purpose. She barely recognized herself, not because she looked different, but because she felt whole. The speech was folded neatly in her clutch, but she'd made a decision hours ago she wouldn't be reading it. She was going to speak from the same place she'd been learning to live from. Truth. Outside the curtain, she could hear Tessa introducing her. The applause began before her name finished. Rory stepped into the light. It was quiet, the kind of hush that demanded honesty. She smiled, took a breath, and began. "I was supposed to be someone's wife this month," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Instead, I became someone I hadn't met, yet me." A murmur rippled through the crowd, soft and reverent. "I stood in a chapel filled with people waiting for a man who never showed. That should have been the worst moment of my life. And maybe for a few minutes it was. But something unexpected happened. I didn't fall apart." She paused, scanning the faces. Some were already emotional. I realized I wasn't waiting for him. I'd been waiting for myself. Her voice caught slightly. She let it. We spend so much of our lives curating images, picking the version of ourselves we think will be loved, accepted, celebrated. But sometimes, it takes losing everything you thought you needed to find what was real. Another pause. "I don't have a tidy ending to give you tonight. What I have is something better. I have the beginning of a new chapter, One where dignity is louder than disappointment, where showing up matters more than perfection, and where love, if it comes again, will meet me exactly where I am not where I'm trying to be. She exhaled the final words, lingering like a prayer. I was left at the altar. But I wasn't abandoned. I was returned to myself. Silence for a heartbeat. Then the room erupted, not in loud applause. Not yet. It was that kind of stunned standing ovation where people rose, slowly wiping tears and nodding at each other like they'd just witnessed something sacred. Rory stepped back from the mic, cheeks damp, heart thudding, not from nerves but release. When she exited backstage, Calder was there. His eyes were glassy. He didn't speak. He just pulled her into the kind of embrace that didn't ask permission, just offered safety. I didn't read the speech she whispered against his shoulder. I know, he said. It was better. He pulled back to look at her. That line about not being abandoned. She nodded, suddenly shy. I've never heard anything more true, he said. Behind them, the music resumed, but softly, background to something more important happening just out of sight. Tessa found them in the hallway, cheeks flushed, holding 2 champagne flutes. Everyone's asking for you, she said to Rory. You just became the story people will be talking about for months. Rory smiled, but her eyes went to Calder. I don't want to be a story, she said. I just want to keep living one. Tessa nodded, her voice gentle. Then keep writing it. One honest word at a time. As the 3 of them stepped back into the glowing ballroom, Rory felt it again, that quiet shift. Something had turned. Not an ending, but the undeniable beginning of something real. The gala was over, but its echo lingered through Savannah's streets, through quiet inboxes filled with messages from strangers, and most of all, through Rory's chest. By morning, the internet had crowned her the woman who rewrote her own story. Journalists were calling. Non-profits were asking her to speak. Even a late-night talk show producer had emailed offering a segment slot. But Rory didn't feel famous. She felt peeled open, honest, vulnerable in a way that didn't need fixing. She sat on Calder's porch with a mug of coffee, still in pajama pants, and one of Tessa's oversized sweatshirts. Across the yard, sunlight danced on wet grass, and wind chimes whispered like a secret being passed between trees. She didn't know he was watching her from the kitchen window until the door creaked open. You hungry? Calder asked, stepping out, barefoot dish towel over his shoulder. Always, she smiled. But not for food, just yet. He sat beside her, stretching his legs out, coffee in hand. You okay, overwhelmed? She admitted. But not in a bad way, just full. Like something cracked open and now everything's pouring in. Calder nodded. You stood up in front of that crowd and told the truth. Most people spend their whole lives dodging it. Rory glanced sideways at him. And are you still dodging anything? A pause. Then he said, I don't talk about Emily much. She stayed quiet, sensing something sacred was about to unfold. She was the kindest person I've ever known, he said, voice low. And losing her, it felt like the world got quieter in a way I didn't know how to fix. Rory's hand found his. She's part of this place, he said, looking out at the yard. The garden, the porch swing. Even the old truck in the shed she kept trying to convince me to sell. A quiet laugh broke between them. I kept thinking he continued if I moved on, I'd be letting her go. But the truth is, I think she'd want me to stop waiting for life to happen around me. Rory swallowed. Do you think she'd like me? I think she'd have handed me a broom and said, Don't screw this up, Calder. That made Rory laugh. Her head tipped back, sunlight catching in her hair. They sat there for a while, wrapped in early light, and the kind of silence that only lives between people who've stopped pretending. Eventually, Calder stood. "Come on. Where you'll see." He led her to the backyard shed, half covered in ivy, slightly leaning like it had stories to tell. He opened the door. Inside sat an old vintage truck, dusty, but intact, with faded blue paint and rust-kissed mirrors. A canvas cover lay folded in the corner. "I never could bring myself to get rid of it," he said. "Tessa learned to drive in this truck." "It's beautiful," Rory whispered. "She always said we should take it on a road trip. Said life didn't wait around for anyone." Rory ran her hand along the hood. "Maybe it's time you listened to her." Calder looked at her. "Maybe it's time we go." The idea took root before she could reason her way out of it. They spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning it, laughing through layers of dust and memory. Calder showed her how to jiggle the key just right, how the passenger window stuck halfway, and how the old radio only played 2 stations, one gospel, one bluegrass. By the time the sun dipped again, the truck was a live engine rumbling like an old friend stretching its legs. They didn't say where they'd go. They didn't need to. It wasn't about the destination. It was about movement. Forward, together. Rory leaned back in the seat, the window down, wind tangling her hair. Calder reached across the seat and took her hand, just a brush of fingers enough to say, "I'm here." She looked at him, and for the first time since her world cracked open, she didn't feel like she was rebuilding alone. She was driving into something new, with someone who didn't want to fix her. Just find her. Every mile, every moment, every quiet, steady mile. The boutique sat tucked between a bookstore and a bakery, in the historic district, quiet, charming, with a hand-painted sign that read, "Clara's Keepsakes." Inside it smelled of linen rosewater and a hint of nostalgia, like someone had bottled every southern grandmother's perfume and let it settle into the wooden floors. Rory stood in front of a full-length mirror, barefoot, her hands smoothing down the fabric of a dress that wasn't white, but wasn't far from it either. It was soft ivory, with delicate buttons trailing down the back and lace sleeves that kissed her wrists. The neckline was modest, the fit effortless. Clara, the owner, bustled around, adjusting pins and offering warm opinions like they were teacups. "You know," she said gently, "I designed this dress for a woman who never made it to the altar, but she wore it anyway. Said she didn't need a husband to feel beautiful. Just needed to look in the mirror and believe what she saw." Rory met her own reflection's gaze. She didn't see the woman who had been left behind. She saw someone who stayed. Someone who kept walking. Clara patted her shoulder. "But I do think this dress is meant for a beginning, not an ending." Behind her, the bell above the door chimed. Tessa's voice floated in light and eager. "Is it okay if I come back?" Rory smiled. "Yes, please." Tessa stepped into the fitting room and stopped short. Her eyes widened and she covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh my gosh." "Too much?" Rory asked, half nervous. Tessa shook her head fiercely. "You look like you." That simple sentence hit harder than any compliment could. Clara gave them a moment and quietly stepped out. Tessa reached for Rory's hand. "Is this for a thing or just trying on pretty things?" Rory took a breath. "I don't know yet." But maybe Tessa asked, eyes glinting. Maybe. Tessa dropped onto the little velvet chair in the corner and tucked her legs up. "I don't want to pressure you, but I just think whatever's between you and my dad, it's the realest thing I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of Hallmark." That made Rory laugh, the kind of laugh that loosened something tight in her chest. "I never pictured myself here," Rory admitted. "Not again? Not so soon." Tessa tilted her head. "But does it feel wrong?" "No," Rory whispered. "It feels quiet, like it's not trying to prove anything." Tessa grinned. "That sounds like him." Later that evening, Rory returned the dress to Clara with a promise to think on it. The bell over the door jingled again as she stepped out into the golden hour, the kind that turned the city soft and honey-colored. Calder was waiting by the truck, leaning against it like he belonged to the frame of the evening. She walked up slowly. He smiled, eyes skimming her face like he was memorizing something. "How was it? Emotional?" she said. "But good." He opened the passenger door for her, and as she climbed in, she noticed the small envelope sitting on the dashboard. "What's this?" He hesitated. "Open it." Inside was a single piece of stationery, handwritten in his familiar, steady hand. It read, "I didn't expect you. But I waited for you anyway. Not the version you used to be. Not the one you showed the world. Just you. And if you want to write the rest of your story with me, I'm not afraid of the messy parts. Love, Calder." Rory held it for a long moment, her thumb tracing the edges. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were wet but peaceful. "You wrote that today, this morning," he said. "I almost didn't give it to you. I'm glad you did." She tucked the note into her purse and leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. "You okay?" he asked. "I think," she whispered for the first time in a long while. "I am." They didn't need more words. The truck rumbled to life, the old engine humming a rhythm only the two of them seemed to understand. Outside, the city faded behind them, and ahead just sky and road and the slow, unfolding bloom of something new. It started with a letter. Not one Rory wrote. One she received. It arrived tucked between bills and catalogs, ordinary on the outside, a cream-colored envelope with her name written in rushed, unfamiliar script. No return address. She opened it slowly, already sensing something unsteady inside. "Rory, I've gone over this in my head 1,000 times trying to find the version of this where I look better. But there isn't one. What I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted to tell you the truth. It wasn't cold feet. It was pressure. From my family. From the idea of what our life was supposed to look like. They never saw you. Not the real you. They saw someone to complete their image. I was too much of a coward to stand up to them, and too selfish to let you go in time to save your dignity. But you did anyway. You walked out of that church with your head high. And then I watched you become everything I wasn't brave enough to be. I know you're with someone now. Someone better. But I needed to say the words I never gave you. I'm sorry." Mason Rory stared at the letter, the weight of it not crushing but oddly light, like it had landed too late to matter, and yet right on time for something else. She sat with it for a moment before picking up her phone. She didn't call Mason. She called Marla Jean. They met at the cafe near the river, the one with chipped mugs and staff who knew everyone's names. Marla Jean was already waiting, 2 cappuccinos in front of her, one extra hot, like Rory liked it. "Tell me what's wrong," she said even before Rory sat down. Rory smiled faintly. "Who says anything's wrong?" Marla Jean arched a brow. Rory slid the letter across the table. She watched Marla Jean read it slowly and with no expression until she reached the end. "Well," she said, setting it down, "that man sure took his time growing a spine." "I don't feel angry," Rory said. "Shouldn't I?" No, Marla Jean said. "Not if you've already moved on." "And honey, you didn't just move on, you rose." Rory looked out the window, watching the moss sway in the trees like silk in slow motion. "It just made me think," she said quietly. "How much time I spent trying to fit into someone else's world." And now Marla Jean asked, "Now I want a world we build together, one that doesn't need me to shrink to fit." Marla Jean reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's not just healing, baby. That's Freedom. That night, as the porch light hummed above her and the cicadas sang like a choir of clocks, Rory handed Calder the letter. He read it once, then again, slower the second time. When he looked up, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "How do you feel?" Rory thought for a long moment. "I feel done," she said. "Not bitter, not broken, just done." He nodded. "I don't need closure from him," she added. "But I think I needed the reminder that what I have now is a choice." He reached for her hand, that familiar gesture that never asked for attention but always offered it. "I've loved you quietly," he said. "Carefully. Because I didn't want to be the next man who took something from you." She looked up, eyes soft. "But what I really want is to be the man who gives something to you. Something lasting, if you'll let me." Rory smiled, tears catching in the corners of her lashes. "You already have." They didn't kiss. Not then. They just sat there, two hearts exhaling beside each other, wrapped in the quiet peace of knowing something was building, not rushed, not forced. Chosen. Slow and sure. The kind of love that didn't need fireworks to feel like fire. The garden behind Calder's house had been transformed. String lights looped from the old oak tree to the back porch, casting a golden haze across the yard. Wildflowers lined the stone path, their colors soft and full of spring. A single table sat beneath a wooden arch, draped in eucalyptus and ivory ribbon. Simple, intimate, honest. Tessa was barefoot hair, twisted in loose curls, placing lemon tarts on a dessert tray with intense concentration. Clara arranged mason jars filled with fresh-cut blooms, and Marla Jean adjusted the music, her playlist a tender mix of old gospel harmonies and vintage jazz. Rory stood in the hallway just beyond the screen door, staring down at the small box in her hand. It wasn't the ring that made her emotional. It was the note tucked beneath it, written in Calder's careful, earnest handwriting. No grand gesture. No promises written in stone. Just a lifetime of showing up with you, for you, beside you. Let's build a love we don't need to recover from. Her hands trembled. Not from fear. From the stillness that had settled inside her, ever since the moment she realized she hadn't just healed, she'd grown. Tessa peeked through the door. "You ready?" Rory turned. "I think I've been ready longer than I realized." Tessa beamed and ran off to grab Calder. When the old screen door creaked open again, he was there. Not in a tux, not in a suit. Just Calder-pressed shirt sleeves rolled a soft blue tie, and that quiet steadiness she'd fallen in love with. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her. And that look, that was the vow. They walked down the path, hand in hand, no music needed, just the hush of an evening that held its breath like it didn't want to miss a second. They stood under the arch as Clara stepped forward, officiating with warmth and only a few teary pauses. When it came time for vows, Rory reached into her pocket, then stopped. "No," she said softly. "No paper." Calder nodded, his eyes already misted. She took his hands. "I'm not here because I was rescued," she said. "I'm here because you stayed. Because when the world saw me as broken, you saw me as rebuilding." She paused, voice shaking just enough to show it was real. "I thought love was about being chosen, but now I know real love is about choosing back, every day, every quiet moment, every season." Calder stepped in closer. "My vow is simple," he said. "To listen, to steady, to never run from the messy parts. You're not someone I need to fix, Rory. You're someone I want to build with." She exhaled, one hand coming to her heart. "Then let's build," she whispered. They exchanged rings, simple, elegant bands. No fanfare, just promises. When Clara pronounced them, they didn't kiss immediately. They just held each other, foreheads pressed, eyes closed, two people who had learned to live without masks. Behind them, the small crowd clapped, cheered, and then let the moment be. Later, under the soft pull of twilight, Rory sat curled up on the porch swing, her dress pooling at her feet. Calder joined her, handing her a slice of lemon tart with a fork stuck in the middle. "I told you Marla Jean would over-deliver," he said. "She should open her own bakery. I think she just needed an excuse to wear lipstick again." They both laughed. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and whole. Rory looked out across the yard, the string lights still glowing, the garden blooming around them, the air smelling faintly of jasmine and something sweeter. She rested her head on Calder's shoulder. "Do you regret anything?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment. "Only not finding you sooner." She smiled. "You found me when I was ready to be found." Calder kissed her temple. "Then I'm exactly on time." A breeze drifted through, rustling the trees, wrapping around them like a blessing. Rory closed her eyes and let it carry her. She didn't need to rewrite the past. She didn't need revenge or resolution. She had the kind of peace that came from walking through fire and finding water on the other side. The kind of love that didn't save her. It stayed. And in that staying, it grew roots. Not perfect, but permanent. A quiet kind of forever. And that was more than enough.